from the News Channel 5 network. This is Urban Outlook.
Hello and welcome to Urban Outlook. I'm April Eaton. Thank you so much for being with us today. Vanderbilt University has a rather unique and interesting exhibit showing on campus. It's called Visionary Aponte, Art and Black Freedom. The show is a showcase of contemporary artists from today who use a book of paintings from the past to recreate and reimagine what the original artist of the book, José Antonio Aponte, may have originally envisioned. Kind of sounds like a mystery, doesn't it? Well, it's a plot of lost and found and then rediscovered in a new and interesting way. To talk to us about this exhibit that's on campus is Dr. William Luis. He is the editor of the Afro-Hispanic Review at Vanderbilt. He's also a professor in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese and carries the title of Gertrude Conway Vanderbilt Endowed Chair. Thank you so much for being with us today.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, April.
Let's talk a little bit about this exhibit, because I know it's a traveling one. So it's housed at your facility at Vanderbilt University temporarily, but talk just a little bit about Visionary Aponte, Art and Black Freedom, and what that exhibit is all about.
Yes, well, we're very lucky to have the exhibit at Vanderbilt, and certainly welcome everyone, including members of the community, coming to see the exhibit. But the exhibit focuses on this individual, but Afro-Cuban, by the name of José Antonio Aponte, who met an untimely death. He was accused of conspiring against the colonial Spanish government and also to set the enslaved free. And he was a carpenter and sculptor by trade, but he also had this fascination for drawings, and so he put together a series of paintings that included images that were traditional of the time, which would have been Greek images and also neoclassic images. But to these images, he also incorporated black figures. He, for example, did a self-portrait of himself. He included members of his family, his father, his grandfather, all who were Afro-Cubans of Cuban descent. So through Aponte, we begin to see not only the classical images of the period, which these images were promoted by the
art community that was allowed.
The art community, but the San Alejandro School of Art, which was a premier school, and that was the training ground for many artists. But San Alejandro exclusively concentrated on these classical and Greek images, but someone like Aponte belonged also to an informal group of black artists who began to work with images that included those images of the time, but also focused on the black image. And so with this, in this respect, he had a self-portrait, but he also had portraits of other leading black figures, Haitians, for example. We had previously seen the Haitian Rebellion in 1791. Aponte was killed in 1812. So the Haitian presence in Cuba and in the Caribbean and Latin America was an important element in the development not only of political beliefs, of freedom, but also of celebrating black images.
And Aponte wasn't just killed, was he? He was executed, wasn't he, for the wrongdoings that they thought that he was doing, correct?
Yes, he was executed in a very brutal way. He was beheaded and his head was put in a cage and exhibited publicly so everyone can see and use as a deterrent for anyone who thinks along the same lines of challenging the colonial government and seeking at the abolition of slavery would meet the same death.
Some of his images also captured what was happening at the times, or his vision of what was happening at the times, the slavery and all of that, correct? Which was also taboo in that time, correct?
Yes, he was one of the first few artists or individuals who began to work with black images.
Yeah.
Later on in the 19th century, we'll see some writers who, like the enslaved Juan Francisco Manzano, who wrote his autobiography, the only enslaved autobiography in Latin America. In the U.S., you have many enslaved autobiographies, but Juan Francisco Manzano wrote his in 1835. So with the Aponte precedent, and then later on in the 19th century, we begin to get more writers and artists working with black images, which is something that was somewhat looked down upon, and in the case of writing, it was prohibited to have those kinds of images incorporated into what was being developed as a Cuban nation, which was, from some point of view, exclusively white, but with Aponte, Manzano, and others, we begin to see them working with black images as well.
It's interesting to me because when you think of art and culture, you think of a free-flowing way of capturing the visions that you see. You wouldn't think that it would be so structured and censored in those times, where you could only do and paint and capture the way this one organization requested, versus letting artists have the freedom to capture those images, paint, sculpt what they saw and what they wanted.
Yes, well, the sentiment of the time was that the only legitimate artistic expression or literary expression came from Europe, came from Spain, came from France, came from other countries. And so those were the models that you followed. But with Aponte and later Manzano and other artists, we begin to see that they are moving away from that model. Not that they incorporate that model, but also use other images that are typical of Cuba. So here we begin to see the emergence of a Cuban culture that includes blacks as well, whereas the European notion that was practiced in Cuba was one that was Eurocentric. But here we have these individuals who are taking steps forward to incorporate other images that are taking place in Cuba and respond to the Cuban reality. So here we have the first planting of the seeds of what would later become a Cuban culture, a Cuban nation.
It's also interesting that because of the guilty plea, we'll say that, and the execution, Aponte's artwork was lost. All of these images were lost, but the way that this exhibit came about was because during the trial, during his testimony, the way he described his images and his art was captured in that testimony. Talk a little bit about how this exhibit came about based on what Aponte described during his trial for his life,
Yes.
really.
Yes, this is a really fascinating story because we have this interrogation of Aponte. As you mentioned, his book of drawings disappeared, but we have these interrogations, and the interrogators are very, very interested in getting detailed information about what he drew. So he talks about, for example, in his self-portrait, about where he's standing, what actually the image contains, where the bench is, which way he's looking, and so you have these detailed information also about some of his drawings that have to do with Greek images and classical images, and so they want to know, the interrogators want to know what these images contain, and so he provides detailed information of the location, the image, how it's presented, which way it's looking, what is actually going on in the paintings, and so when this exhibit was envisioned, artists and the Aponte exhibit is curated by Maria Magdalena Campos Pons, of course, of Vanderbilt University, but also by Edouard Duval Carrier, who is a Haitian artist, both very well-known individuals, and they envisioned this whole idea of how they would contact artists international artists and artists who would be great in contributing to this, and then they were asked to kind of go over these transcripts and envision what the transcript says, and then for them to transfer or transform these words into images, of course, through their lens and their artistic talent. So it's a wonderful way of not only recreating how artists imagine what Aponte was imagining through a transcript that was an interrogation that was asked. And so it's a wonderful blend of historical information with artistic Aponte's creativity, but also the creativity of those artists who contribute to the exhibit.
Let's take a quick break, and I want to see more of these beautiful images and also talk more about the story behind Aponte and how these new artists interpreted that work, which I think is quite interesting as well. We'll be right back after this. Stay with us.